The air is thick with salt and smoke. Your knuckles are white as you grip the carved dragon head of the longship, the beast's wooden eyes staring blindly at the foreign shore. For months, this has been your world. The endless grey sea, the biting wind, the gnawing hunger, and the stories whispered in the dark of glorious death and halls filled with endless mead. This is the image that burned itself into the nightmares of Europe for 300 years. The Viking, a human storm, crashing onto the shores of history, leaving chaos and legends in its wake. When we see this man, we see a monster, a force of nature. We assume he was born this way, emerging from the frozen north with an axe in his hand and ice in his veins. But we are wrong. Before the monster, there was a boy. Before the raider, there was a farmer's son. Before the axe learned the taste of blood, his hands knew only the feel of a fishing net and the rough bark of a tree. The man who would one day shake kingdoms to their foundations was once a child, as vulnerable as any other. So how does that happen? How do you systematically strip away the boy and forge the beast? This isn't a story of magic or myth. It is a story of a process. A brutal, unforgiving, and ruthlessly efficient training regimen that began not on the training field, but in the cradle itself. And in some cases, it began with the simple, terrifying question of whether a child would be allowed to live at all. In this video, we will deconstruct the Viking warrior. We will uncover the savage games that passed for child's play, the relentless weapon drills that turned limbs into instruments of death, and the psychological conditioning that could unlock a fury so profound it became legendary. This is the true story of how a Viking was made. In the modern world, the birth of a child is a celebration of new life. In the Viking Age, it was an appraisal. When a newborn was brought into the world, it was not immediately welcomed into the family. It was laid at the feet of the father, the patriarch of the clan. He would examine the infant, not with the gentle eyes of a doting parent, but with the cold, pragmatic gaze of a leader whose family's survival depended on the strength of its members. He was looking for weakness, deformity, sickness, any sign that the child would be a drain on the clan's precious resources. In a land of long, dark winters and scarce food, every mouth to feed had to one day become a pair of hands that could work, or a warrior that could fight. If the child was deemed fit, the father would lift him up, claim him as his own, and give him a name. He was now part of the family, protected and provided for. But if the child was found wanting, the consequences were grim. The practice was known as útburðr, which translates to carrying out. The infant would be taken from the warmth of the longhouse and left in the wilderness, exposed to the elements, to the wolves, to the uncaring gods. It was a death sentence, delivered in the first few hours of life. This sounds monstrous to our modern ears, a sign of a heartless culture. But to understand it, we have to understand their world. This wasn't done out of malice, but out of a desperate, brutal practicality. The sagas, epic poems written centuries after the Viking Age but drawing on older oral traditions, are filled with heroes of immense strength and flawless lineage. The cultural pressure was immense. A family's reputation, its honor, was tied to the vitality of its bloodline. A weak child wasn't just a tragedy, it was a stain on that honor. So, from the very moment of birth, the first lesson was learned. Only the strong are worthy. Survival is not a right. It is a privilege that must be earned. The world is a cold and unforgiving place, and it does not tolerate weakness. For the boy who was lifted from the floor, who was given a name and a place by the fire, this lesson echoed in his mind. He had passed the first test, but he would spend the rest of his childhood proving, again and again, that his father's choice was the right one. The true training was just beginning, and it would be disguised as play. But these were not the innocent games of modern children. These were the games of gods and men, and they were designed to build warriors. Imagine a field, muddy and frozen, somewhere in the heart of Norway. Two teams of boys and young men are gathered. The goal is simple: get a hard, leather-wrapped ball to the opponent's side of the field. The game is called Natalika. It sounds like a simple ball game. It was anything but. There were very few rules. Tackling was not just allowed, it was encouraged. So was wrestling your opponent to the ground, blocking them with your body, and using any means necessary to stop them. The Icelandic sagas describe these games in vivid detail. They speak of broken bones, bloody noses, and tempers flaring into outright brawls that could last for hours. In the Egil's saga, a young Egil Skallagrimsson, who would become one of history's most feared Viking poets and warriors, gets into a dispute during a game of Natalika and ends it by burying an axe in his opponent's head. He was 7 years old. While this story is likely an exaggeration to emphasize his warrior nature, it reveals a fundamental truth. These games were simulators for the chaos of a real battle. They taught a boy to endure pain, to push his body to its absolute limit, and to develop a ferocious competitive spirit. They taught him how to work as a team, to anticipate an opponent's move, and to exploit a moment of weakness with explosive force. And it wasn't just Natalika. Wrestling, or Glima, was a cornerstone of a young Viking's physical education. It was a sport of leverage, balance, and raw, grappling strength. A boy would learn how to control an opponent's body, how to throw them off balance, and how to use their weight against them, all vital skills for the close quarters ugliness of a shield wall collapsing into a chaotic melee. There were tests of pure strength. Stone lifting was a common pastime, with specific, named stones of immense weight that became local legends. Young men would test their manhood against these silent granite judges. Could you lift the Husafell stone? Could you carry it? This wasn't just about building muscle, it was about building a reputation. Strength was status. Endurance was forged in the elements. Swimming in the freezing waters of a fjord wasn't just for fun, it was a test of willpower against the shock of the cold. It built resilience and taught them to control their breathing under extreme stress, a skill that could mean the difference between life and death if a longship capsized in a storm or during a coastal raid. While their bodies were being hardened by these brutal pastimes, their minds were being shaped by the stories told around the fire. They didn't have books or schools. Their education came from the sagas, recited from memory by the skalds, the poet historians of their time. They heard tales of Ragnar Lothbrok raiding Paris, of Sigurd slaying the dragon Fafnir, of Odin, the Allfather, who sacrificed an eye for wisdom and hanged himself from the world tree to learn the secrets of the runes. These weren't just bedtime stories, they were a cultural blueprint. They taught a young boy what it meant to be a man. A man seeks glory. A man is not afraid of death, for a glorious death in battle is the only way to reach Valhalla. A man's name, his reputation, is the only thing that truly lasts. These stories created a powerful psychological imperative. The goal wasn't just to be a good farmer. The goal was to become a hero worthy of a saga. By the time a boy reached adolescence, he was strong, tough, and steeped in a culture that glorified violence and honor above all else. His body was a weapon, but now he had to learn how to use it with the real tools of the trade. The time for games was over. It was time to learn the dance of steel. Weapon training for a young Viking wasn't about elegant dojos or structured lessons. It was a practical, hands-on education, often taught by a father, an uncle, or an older brother who had seen battle. The goal was efficiency, how to end a fight as quickly and decisively as possible. Let's start with the most iconic Viking weapon, the axe. To the uninitiated, the Dane axe seems like a crude, brutish tool, a heavy blade on a long stick. In reality, it was a surprisingly versatile and terrifyingly effective weapon in the hands of a skilled user. Training would begin with the mundane. A boy would spend years chopping wood, learning the balance of the axe, feeling how the weight of the head could do the work for him. This built the core strength and muscle memory required to swing it for hours. In sparring, he would learn its unique advantages. Unlike a sword, the axe's weight was concentrated at the head, creating devastating, bone-shattering impacts that could splinter a shield and crush a helmet. He would learn to use the axe's beard, the lower, hooked part of the blade, to hook an opponent's shield and pull it down, exposing their body for a killing blow, or to hook a leg and pull them off their feet. It was a weapon of leverage and brutal power, and its psychological impact was immense. The sight of a line of Vikings roaring, with great axes resting on their shoulders, was enough to break the morale of even seasoned soldiers. The most common weapon, however, was not the axe, but the spear. It was cheap to make and incredibly effective, especially when used in formation. A young Viking would practice for hours, thrusting at a wooden post or a target made of turf. He learned to put the power of his entire body into a single, focused thrust, aiming for the gaps in an opponent's armor or shield. He also trained to throw it, a vital skill for the opening moments of a battle, to disrupt the enemy's charge and thin their ranks before the lines met. The sword was a different matter. Swords were expensive, difficult to make, and a symbol of high status. They were often passed down through generations, given names, and believed to possess a spirit of their own. If a boy's family was wealthy enough to own one, his training would be a privilege. It focused more on speed and agility than the axe. He'd learn cutting combinations, parries, and the crucial footwork needed to control distance in a duel. But individual skill was secondary to the most important military concept in the Viking world, the skjaldborg, the shield wall. This was the heart of Viking tactics. A line of warriors, shields interlocked, creating a near impenetrable wall of wood and steel. The survival of everyone depended on the discipline of each individual. Training for the shield wall was a brutal exercise in trust and endurance. Instructors would have young warriors form a wall, while others would push against it, throw rocks and logs at it, and probe it with wooden poles to simulate spears. The boy learned to plant his feet, lean his weight into his shield, and trust that the man next to him would protect his exposed side. He learned to ignore the chaos and the noise, to listen for the commands of his chieftain, and to move as one single organism, to step forward in unison, to brace for a charge, to create a boar's snout wedge to punch through an enemy line. If one man's courage failed, if he broke formation and ran, he didn't just doom himself, he created a gap that could lead to the slaughter of his kinsmen. The punishment for such cowardice was absolute scorn, and often death. Through this relentless training, a boy became a soldier. He knew his weapons. He understood his role in the chaos of battle. His body was a hardened instrument of war. But there was one final step. To become a true Viking raider, he had to unlock something deeper, a state of mind, beyond ordinary rage. He had to learn to summon the beast. No discussion of the Viking warrior is complete without confronting the legend of the berserker. The image is seared into popular culture, a wild-eyed madman, biting his shield, howling like a wolf, shrugging off mortal wounds as he slaughters his way through enemy lines. The name itself, berserker, likely meant either bear shirt or bear shirt, suggesting they fought either clad in animal pelts or without armor, in a state of pure frenzy. Did these warriors truly exist? Yes. The sagas and historical accounts from their enemies are clear on this. The real question is, how did they do it? Hollywood often presents a simple answer: magic potions or mushrooms. There is a popular theory that berserkers consumed hallucinogenic fungi like Amanita muscaria to induce their trance, like fury. While this is possible, there is no definitive archaeological or literary evidence to support it. Relying on an unpredictable substance right before a battle seems tactically unwise. A more likely explanation lies in a combination of intense psychological conditioning and ritual. Think of the berserkers not as a standard troop type, but as a warrior cult, likely dedicated to the god of war and fury, Odin. These were men who, through years of ritual, meditation, and grueling trials, learned to deliberately induce a state of ecstatic, dissociative rage. This process would have been terrifying. It likely involved fasting, sleep deprivation, and intense, rhythmic chanting or drumming, all designed to break down the normal barriers of the conscious mind. They may have performed rituals that simulated death and rebirth, symbolically becoming the animal spirit they sought to embody, the bear or the wolf. They would work themselves into a frenzy, a state we might today recognize as a form of self-induced hysteria or a combat-related trance. When the berserker gang, or berserk fit, took hold, the results were horrifying for their opponents. Accounts describe them as being immune to fire and steel, possessing superhuman strength. This is likely an exaggeration born of terror, but from a psychological perspective, a warrior in such a state would be flooded with adrenaline. Their perception of pain would be dramatically reduced, allowing them to ignore wounds that would fell another man. They wouldn't be invulnerable, but they would keep fighting long after they should have been dead. Their purpose on the battlefield was primarily psychological. A dozen berserkers, placed at the front of the shield wall, howling and convulsing with rage, could shatter an enemy's morale before the first blow was even struck. They were shock troops in the truest sense of the word, designed to sow terror and chaos, creating the breach through which the rest of the army could pour. This was the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. The ultimate weapon in the Viking arsenal wasn't the axe or the sword. It was the ability to cast off the rational mind and become pure, focused rage. It was the mastery not just of the body, but of the very spirit of war itself. From the cold appraisal at birth to the savage joy of Natalika, from the endless repetition of the axe swing to the disciplined hell of the shield wall, from the heroic tales of the sagas to the terrifying, self-induced madness of the berserker gang, the Viking raider was not born, he was forged. He was the product of a culture that saw life as a constant struggle, where strength was virtue and a glorious death was the ultimate prize. Every aspect of his existence, from the games he played as a child to the gods he worshipped as a man, was meticulously designed to prepare him for the single moment that would define his life. The chaos of battle on a foreign shore. The boy who once carried water from the well now carries an axe that thirsts for something else. He stands on the prow of the ship, a graduate of the most brutal training regimen the ancient world ever devised. He is no longer just a man. He is a weapon, honed to a razor's edge, aimed at the heart of an unsuspecting world. His training is complete. The raid is about to begin. The process that created these warriors was as complex as it was brutal. If you want to continue exploring the minds of the most feared figures in history, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. And let us know in the comments, what part of a Viking's training do you believe was the most crucial for their success in battle? The physical games, the weapon skills, or the psychological conditioning? We read all your comments. Thank you for watching. May your axe stay sharp and your courage never fail.